This is JC Setting the Record Straight podcast. I'm your host, JC. On this channel, we set the record straight. That means we fact check and correct commonly believed misinformation and propaganda. So I actually wanted to do a couple of other topics regarding Cynthia G, but in my last video, which very few people watched, I promised that I was going to do a follow-up video discussing employees' rights regarding the so-called pandemic. And the reason that I call it so-called pandemic is because the C-19 debacle really doesn't meet the indicia of a pandemic, even though they're calling it one. So we're just going to use that word with air quotes. So a lot of people talk about their privacy rights regarding vaccinations and things of that nature, and they'll discuss how they think it falls under HIPAA. Actually, it's not HIPAA, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. And there are also related provisions under Section 501 of the Rehabilitation Act and Pandemic Planning in the Workplace, which I'm going to post a link to this. This information is all coming from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission website. So, information pertaining to whether someone has contracted C-19 is considered a disability or disability related. And so it is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so there's different information regarding different situations, such as whether you're an applicant, whether you've been offered a position but you haven't started yet. But I'm going to cover information pertaining to those who are already employees, and they may be asked to take a vaccination. They may be asked whether they were vaccinated. They may be asked to give their temperatures. So that is the subject of this video. So the Americans with Disabilities Act regulates employers' disability-related inquiries and medical examinations for all applicants and employees, including those who do not have ADA disabilities. So that's saying it protects you even if you don't have COVID. And so the ADA prohibits covered employers from excluding individuals with disabilities from the workplace for health or safety reasons unless they pose a direct threat. And a direct threat means a significant risk of substantial harm. And so the employer has the burden of proving that you are a direct threat. So under the guidelines from the CDC, an employee would pose a direct threat if they have C-19 or they exhibit symptoms of C-19 when present in a workplace. Again, the employer has the burden of proof. So if you don't have any symptoms, an employer cannot exclude you from working. And any assessments of whether you pose a direct threat has to be based on objective, factual information, not on subjective perceptions or irrational fears about a specific disability or disabilities. So just because an employer has a subjective perception that anyone who isn't vaccinated poses a direct threat doesn't mean that they can actually exclude you from the workplace. They can't exclude you from the workplace unless you actually exhibit symptoms of C-19. Now, I know that there are places where they are doing this, specifically New York, but just because they're doing it doesn't mean that it's legal, right? Because you can have a legal right to something, but if you're not willing to enforce it by filing a lawsuit, then employers are going to do whatever they want. They're going to walk all over you. And a lot of people are not willing to go through a lawsuit. And even if you are willing to go through a lawsuit, you may not find an employer who's willing to take your case. Now, if you have training, then you can represent yourself, which is what I would do. But if you don't, then I guess at the very least you can file a complaint with the Equal Opportunity Commission and let them do their investigation. Because if they unlawfully lay you off for not getting a vaccination or whatever the case may be, then you may be entitled to damages, including unpaid wages, punitive damages. I'm not really supposed to be giving legal advice, so I can't give you advice on your specific information, but this is legal information. Again, this information is posted on the Equal Opportunity Commission's website. Also, employers are prohibited from making disability-related inquiries and medical examinations. The exception is that the employer must show, based on a reasonable belief, that either an employee's ability to perform essential job functions will be impaired by their medical condition, or that the employee will pose a direct threat due to the medical condition. So again, if you have actual symptoms, then that is enough for you to be considered a direct threat. Simply not being vaccinated does not make you a direct threat. So employers are not allowed to make disability-related inquiries, which means that they're not allowed to ask you specifically whether you have a diagnosis. And they can't ask you questions about whether you have a compromised immune system because of things such as HIV. They are only allowed to ask about the symptoms, not about the actual disability. So they are allowed to ask, list COVID symptoms and ask if you have any of those. So the taking of body temperatures is considered a medical examination. However, because the CDC guidelines permit precautions, the taking of body temperatures are allowed under the ADA. However, simply having a high body temperature is not ipso facto proof that you pose a direct threat, because you could have a high body temperature for something unrelated to C-19, such as having a flu. So it has to be body temperature along with other symptoms such as chills, cough, shortness of breath, sore throat, etc. So if you actually do demonstrate symptoms of C-19, then the employer can send you home. However, the third provision under the ADA states that the employer must make reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities, absent undue hardship. So if an employer can send you home and allow you to get your work done from home with the laptop, then they have to do it unless they can show an undue hardship. So to address the final issue, which is whether an employer can require you to get vaccinated, it has to be job related and consistent with business necessity. So I guess that means if you work in a medical field where you could infect other people, then yeah, that would be job related. But in other workspaces where you can, practice social distancing, they would have to accommodate you. And then there's also the medical or religious exemption. So if you have a condition such as blood clots and you don't want to get the vaccine, then they have to make a reasonable accommodation for you. And if you have a sincerely believed religious belief, they also have to accommodate you. Now again, Employers want to do what they want to do. They don't want to go through this trouble. They just basically want you to follow their policies and not make any trouble. But if they don't comply with the law, then you may just have to file a lawsuit. So I hope it doesn't come to this, but if my employer ever asks me whether I was vaccinated, I'm not going to disclose that information. And if they try to force me to get vaccinated, well, I guess we're just going to have to see what the court has to say about it. But usually they settle. I mean, I've done this before. This isn't my first time at the rodeo. I don't enjoy filing lawsuits, but if it comes down to it, I definitely will. Laws are here for our protection. Just because they're employers, they're not God. You don't have to obey whatever they say. And you also don't have to allow society to bully you into doing something that you don't want to do. Because they will flip this around and make it seem like you're causing them a problem. Like you're holding us up. If everyone would get vaccinated, we'll have herd immunity, which is, there is no such thing as herd immunity. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. And this is the worst vaccine I've ever heard in my life. It doesn't give you any immunity. It doesn't prevent you from getting sick. And it doesn't prevent you from being able to spread it to others. So what's the point of the vaccine? And for the so-called conspiracy theorists who say that this is to sterilize us, well, I'm already sterilized. So why do I need the vaccine when I'm already sterilized? And so I know some people don't like this comparison, but I do see mandatory vaccinations as being akin to rape, because you are trying to penetrate someone's body without their consent. And I think everyone should have autonomy and agency over their own body. I don't think that the herd has the authority to tell you what to do with your body. And I think that by going along with it and not putting up some kind of fight really makes it harder for everyone else. Because if everyone else is doing it and you're the troublemaker, then they're just going to weed you out and then replace you with someone else. But, you know, they can't put all of us out of work. And I realize that many of you have already been bullied into getting vaccinated. So it may be too late for you, but for those of you who haven't been vaccinated yet and you still don't want to, you at least need to know your rights. So I would suggest that you go to the link and that you read this stuff for yourself. And when you're put in a situation that you don't allow yourself to be bullied, and then you know what your rights are, and hopefully you will have courage enough to actually do something about it. So that's my 2 cents on the subject. And I'm really grateful that I live in a state where mandatory vaccinations and masks are basically outlawed by an executive order passed by our governor. So I shouldn't have to worry about this problem. But for those of you who live in states where you don't have this type of legal protection, federal law is still in place. And even if employers are allowed to do certain things, there's a way that they can do it. And if they don't do it properly, then they're going to be in trouble. And a lot of employers don't know. Their HR people don't know the law. So don't assume that just because they are in a position of authority that they're right. They're not. So anyway, I hope this video helps. I promised that I would do it even though I really wanted to move on to something else. But yeah, I guess I'm going to get back to roasting Cynthia G. Thanks for your support. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you will know when I upload new content.